Hi everybody, this is Everyday Commentary, and I am going to do a video review of this, the Surefire Jekyll. It is one of the two knives in the Surefire line that are titanium frame lock flippers. The other is the Surefire Charlie, which is slightly bigger. Now, the Surefire Jekyll is listed as having a 3-inch blade, and as you will see, that is simply untrue. Here is, as you can see, this is that's the Benchmade mini grip, and it has a 2.92-inch blade. So the 2.92-inch blade is much larger than the so-called 3-inch blade on the Jekyll. What is actually happening is they are measuring from the center of the pivot to the tip. No one else measures like that, and so you're getting a very unusual reading on the blade length. In fact, if you look at it, it's something closer to 2.5 inches. I'm going to show you a size comparison with the. So that's the Spyderco Dragonfly, and as you can see, it's pretty close in size to the Spyderco Dragonfly, maybe a little bigger. So this is actually a 2.5-inch blade. In all reality, it's not anywhere near a 3-inch blade, but this is a really good knife. It has 154 stainless steel, 154 cm stainless steel. It is a titanium, as you can see there, frame lock, see there, and then flipper. One of the things that's strange about this knife is the detent. The detent is that little, this thing right here. It's the little ball bearing that rides in a pocket in the blade, or in the frame lock, the lock bar. And as you can see, it rides on a path and it falls into that hole right there. And let's see, you can hear it. And that's it. And so what happens is, as you put pressure on the knife to open up, the bearing has to become dislodged from the little detent, and that's what sort of gives it its tension. One of the things that's going on here is that this knife is really fast using the thumb studs. I mean, it is lightning fast. You don't need a wrist flick, you don't need anything. The thumb studs are so good, so good. And here's a really cool feature. The thumb studs act as the blade stop. So you can see it acts as the blade stop in both directions. There is nothing on the back. There's one standoff and then the pivot, and there is no lock bar, or no stop bar. It's just the thumb studs themselves act as a stop bar, and they work really well. The flipper, you can flip it with a little bit of wrist action, but as Aaron and I have discussed on the podcast Gear Geeks Live, that's the sign of a not perfect flipper. I got this knife new from Blade HQ, and I'm going to go through and do my normal 10-point review. 10 different categories. Up to 2 points in each category. A 0 means it fails, a 1 means it's okay, and a 2 means it's excellent. And I'll give you an overall score. So, in terms of design, I really do like this knife. I think it's just about the right size. I like the width of the blade. One of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that the blade hides nicely in the handle. Because there is no stop bar here, and I just realized that that's why, this blade really does sink deep into the handle. As you can see, the tip of the blade is really close. I mean, it's obviously not close enough to ever catch your finger, but it's really close to the back, the spine of the knife. And that means that, unlike on other knives, such as a lockback, where the blade has to ride high because inside here there is the lock bar itself, this blade doesn't sink in anywhere near as deeply into the handle as this does. In fact, I know of no other knife that sinks as deeply into the handle as the Surefire Jekyll and Charlie, because they're exactly the same design, just different size. And so that's one of the reasons why this knife carries so well, is because the lack of a stop bar means that it can just dive deep into that handle. So, like, I would say something like 95% of the handle width is used to cover the blade, and only a little tiny bit in the back is not. And so in terms of design, because of how wide the blade is and how much blade you get for the size, I give this knife a 2 out of 2. This is just a really compact design. In terms of fit and finish, I did score it as a I did score it as a 1, and the reason I scored it as a 1 is the detent problem I explained before. Now, I carried this knife for, a month and a half, and I never had it pop out of my pocket. I never had it open. I had it open up in my pocket one time, but that was my fault. Still, the detent is not exactly what I want it to be. I'd really like the detent to be strong enough that it gives you some resistance to overcome when opening the knife. And you can, with practice, you can get it to open without a wrist flick. Using the flipper. With the thumb studs, it's super simple. I mean, that little flick right there, see, using the same motion that you would to like toss a coin. You put it right in there and pop it open. It really, really works. I like that a lot. I think that makes this knife much faster to deploy than other knives. And I think really this has shown me that if you make a good thumb stud, it's just as good as a thumb hole or just as good as a flipper. But that lack of a perfect detent, as you can see, it's especially hard from around the camera. That lack of a perfect detent means that this knife does not get a 2 out of 2 in fit and finish. It gets a 1 out of 2. In terms of grip, I gave it a 2 out of 2, and I'll show you why. This is a really interesting knife in that it has a bunch of different things on it that give it grip. First, it has this really good, bulky gear-like jimping here. Second, it has these little grooves for your fingers to fit in. And I kind of think that they're stupid because, number one, I have medium-sized hands and they're too small. But what it does do is the milling out, and let's see if I can catch it in the light. The milling out of these grooves created sort of a very, very fine cross hatching in the aluminum, and that does actually give you some grip, which is sort of surprising. The other thing is this chunky gear pattern down here. I thought it might be create hot spots or something like that, but if you're squeezing enough to do that, then you're gonna create hot spots no matter what. It doesn't really impact your grip negatively. One of the other really cool factors is that based on where the cutout is for the thumb stud, your finger locks in here, and then your next finger locks in here, so that the pocket clip, it's really a great design. The pocket clip actually aids in grip. And so overall, this is a knife that really locks in your hand. Even though it's a small knife, you can get all 4 fingers on there pretty comfortably. If you compare it, say, to the grip on the Dragonfly, you can still get 4 fingers comfortably on the Dragonfly. But in this case, you're using a choil, and the Jekyll doesn't have a choil. So for lacking a true choil, just having this little cutout here for your finger, this knife does excellent in terms of grip. In terms of carry, again, we're going to go back to that amazingly deep burying blade. The fact that it just drops into the handle so deeply means that this knife is really, really, really narrow in the pocket. I mean, if you look at it, the blade is probably just, it might be a little less wide than the Dragonfly, which has a very wide blade for its size. And by doing that, the Surefire Jekyll, you really sort of takes up a whole lot less space in your pocket than it would otherwise. So I gave it a 2 out of 2 in carry. On its, in terms of its steel, I really do like the 154 cm. After I had a couple of bad experiences with it, this knife, the Benchmade Griptilian Mini Grip, has really convinced me that this steel is quite a good steel. It holds an edge, it's not terribly difficult to sharpen, it's pretty rust resistant, and in this make, and this version of the steel, that has, a pretty, as you can tell, because this little red light has been in almost every shot, it has a really fine polish on it, something that sort of gives it a nice, luxurious feel. It means that the pores of the steel are even closer together. They've kind of blended them together, and it'll be even more rust resistant. So in terms of the 154 cm, I've had no rust problems whatsoever on this knife, and this knife has better blade polish to it, so I'd imagine it'd hold up even better. In terms of grind, this is a flat grind. It is probably, at 2/3 of a flat grind, 2/3 of the way up flat grind, and I like the swedge. It does save a little weight, and it makes the knife extra pointy. They did a really good job of making the grind simple enough to get a bunch of things done, but not so complex that it is annoying or difficult to sharpen. The grind is good, and that the secondary bevel is nice and wide. You can see the secondary bevel there catching the light. That makes it easier to sharpen. For example, look at the secondary bevel on this knife, which is much, much thinner. You can see, let's see if we can catch them both in the light. There we go. You can see that this one is pronouncedly more thick. I actually do like that. I think that makes it easy to sharpen, and it really gives you a big boost. So I give it a 2 out of 2 in blade steel. I get a 2 out of 2 in grind. In terms of blade shape, again, I really, really like the flat part here with a little bit of belly. This is probably close to my ideal blade shape. It just works, and it works well. It allows for nice rolling cuts, allows for good slicing cuts, it allows for good piercing with the swedge. So in terms of blade shape, I gave it a 2 out of 2. In terms of deployment method, so I gave it a 1 out of 2 because the intended deployment, the flipper, doesn't work without a little wrist flick. Now that's not the end of the world, it's not a big deal, but the thumb studs are so good, so good, that if I was going to change anything from the written review, I might change that. I don't think I will, because if you intend it to be a frame lock, it should be able to be a frame lock, or a flipper. It should be able to flip pretty easily, and it doesn't. And so for that, I give it a 1 out of 2. In terms of the retention method, the clip here is one of, if not the best clips I've ever seen in terms of accentuating grip. It is a little wide, and it is a little high, and it is not deep pocket carry, so about that much of the knife will stick out of your pocket. But it really, really does aid in grip, and so for that I gave it a 2 out of 2. I did end up liking it a lot. In terms of the lock, you can see here, this knife has a ton of room to go, and that is in part because the blade steel is significantly thicker than the lock bar. As you can see, I can, I get no real lock wiggle. I get nothing in terms of blade play. I get no blade play at the very tip of the knife. If you hold the knife here, you're never going to get blade play unless it's a really crappy knife. But if you can get way out here and get nothing in terms of blade play, then it's a good knife. I really do like the lock here. I noticed that the frame lock is really pronounced. It's cut thickly, and I think that that's a sign that this might not be a super high tolerance knife, like the tolerances on the machine used to cut the lock bar. The wider the gap, the more imprecise that machine is. Like if you look at a Sebenza, let me get a Sebenza real quick. If you look at a Sebenza, you'll see that the lock bar is cut. The lock bar is the gap is thinner, and then if you look at a custom knife, you'll see that the lock bar cutout is even thinner still. I mean, this is my Steve Carroll custom, and the lock bar here is just like a hair. I mean, it's so thin, and that's just a matter of time. How much time do you want to spend? Like, this could be done on a router and they cut it and it's done, or they can do it on a CNC machine and it's done. And so the more time you spend on the lock bar, cutting out the lock bar, the tighter the fit will be. And so if you see there, you can see them all sort of lined up next to each other. So this is really wide, this is medium, and this is like paper thin. I found that gives you a little bit of a better lockup. I mean, there's the Steve Carroll EDMW lockup. It's just so tight. This is a great little knife. But in terms of the lock bar and the lockup, I gave it a 2 out of 2. So this knife gets an 18 out of 20, and I think that's pretty representative for what it is. It's a really good little knife. If you're looking for a titanium flipper frame lock, there aren't a whole lot of options. It's essentially, in the production world, it's essentially this and maybe the Eros from CRKT, and I think there might be a combative edge knife that also is a frame lock flipper. But there's just not a whole lot of them out there, and of them out there, this is the one that I like the size and shape the best. The Eros just seems way too thin for me. So that's my review, and I hope that I gave you enough size comparison to whoever asked for this video so that you could see. Here's the Sebenza. It's about the size, just a little bit smaller than the small Sebenza. But again, this knife really does fold into that handle. The blade really does fold into the handle quite a bit because there's no stop bar. So that's where we are. Thanks for watching, and check out the website. You can find a video or a written review at everydaycommentary.com, and if you search the reviews tab, you'll find the Jekyll towards the end of the knife reviews. And if you want, listen to the podcast at Gear Geeks Live. You can find it in iTunes. Just go to Gear Geeks Live, or type Gear Geeks Live into the search bar in iTunes, and you'll find it. Thanks.